0 women, 1 ship. 200 men, 6 months at sea. How did the Navy handle that? On paper rules, punishment sermons, below decks reality. Shore leave blue pay in a night. Long voyages bred quiet arrangements, no logbook named. Hammocks got shared. Watchmates got close. Some captains cracked down. Others only cared that the guns were ready and the ship made speed. Court-martial pages tell one story. Mess deck jokes and letters home hint at another. Was it strict denial or a system that learned to look away? We'll lift the hatch and follow the clues. No spoilers, just how sailors actually lived. Tell me the exact time you're watching Dawn Watch or Midnight Tide. If this pulled you in, tap like so the next chapter sails a little farther. The ocean doesn't just swallow ships, it swallows secrets. And one of the oldest, most unspoken ones is this. What happens when hundreds of men are locked on a floating fortress for months, sometimes years, with no privacy, no women, and no outlet, but salt sweat and superstition? You can almost hear it, the groan of the timbers, the shuffle of boots, the sighs, muffled by waves. The Navy may have conquered half the world's oceans, but it was also a laboratory of human restraint, where desire was as tightly contained as the gunpowder below deck. You step aboard a ship of the age of sail, the smell hitting first tar rope damp wood, and the stale musk of men packed together like salted meat. Hammocks sway inches apart, a rhythmic reminder that personal space is a myth. There are no doors to close, no curtains to draw, only the creak of rope and the whisper of waves that tell everyone's secrets. The youngest sailors, some barely 16, sleep shoulder to shoulder with veterans who've seen continents and tempests. You can't help but wonder, what did all that closeness do to people? The first rule of sea life, your body belongs to the Navy now. Every movement is regulated, when to wake, when to eat, when to climb the rigging, or scrub the deck until your hands go raw. The ship itself becomes a kind of monastery, a place where discipline replaces intimacy. But unlike monks, sailors don't have faith to sublimate their hunger. They have only duty rum and an ocean's worth of silence. It's not that sex didn't exist here, it's that it wasn't supposed to. Imagine weeks without seeing land, months without a single civilian woman in sight. Your skin burns, your muscles ache, and at the night when the sea grows quiet, the mind starts inventing its own companions. Some wrote letters to sweethearts they hadn't seen in years. Others carved initials into planks like confessions to the wood itself. Even laughter became a form of survival. Crude jokes, obscene songs, and tales so wild you couldn't tell if they were true or just fantasies given shape by boredom. But desire didn't disappear. It adapted. Sailors learned to hide it in jokes, to bury it in work, to drown it in rum. They'd sing sea shanties full of innuendo, teasing what could never be spoken. One popular tune went, "Farewell and adieu to you ladies of Spain," sung loud enough to make the deck rumble. It wasn't about Spain, of course. It was about everything left behind. Every verse was a sigh, turned into rhythm. Every chorus, a confession disguised as laughter. Have you ever noticed how people start inventing rituals when they can't get what they want? On ships, these rituals filled the void. Washing decks at dawn, polishing brass until it gleamed, shaving. At the same hour every morning, even the smallest task became a kind of therapy. Sailors used routine to fight longing, to scrub desire out of their bones. It rarely worked for long, but it kept them sane enough to make it to the next sunrise. Officers like to pretend that naval discipline erased temptation. But human nature didn't vanish under uniform. The hierarchy itself created strange pressures. Young midshipmen idolized their captains, men bonded in danger, and friendships deepened beyond what land-bound society could tolerate. The Navy never wrote manuals on how to handle loneliness. It just punished anyone caught trying to fix it the wrong way. Still, this was a city afloat with its own rules and its own sins. Some captains tolerated quiet relationships as long as the work got done. Others launched investigations with the zeal of witch hunts. The term unnatural acts appeared in ship logs like coded lightning, swift, silent, dangerous. You could be flogged, branded, or hanged for what was often nothing more than tenderness in the wrong place. Yet everyone knew it happened. It had always happened. The irony, the same men who punished it often relied on that very closeness to keep morale intact. When storms hit and masts cracked, it wasn't prayer that held the crew together. It was trust, affection, and an intimacy born of survival. Out here, the line between friendship and something deeper blurred as naturally as horizon and sky. Sometimes at night, sailors looked out over the black water and imagined the world beyond the taverns, the laughter, the touch of someone who wasn't another crewmate. That longing became a kind of ghost haunting every voyage. You can almost feel it even now in museum ships or preserved cabins, that invisible ache left behind by centuries of silence. The Navy called itself a brotherhood, and in a sense it was. But every brotherhood has its shadows, and on the endless sea, shadows had nowhere to hide. By dawn, the deck comes alive again, boots thumping ropes, groaning gulls circling like gossipers. The rules of the Navy are simple order. First emotion later, or, preferably, never. You start realizing that discipline isn't just about steering ships. It's about steering desire. Everything from the way hammocks are spaced to the hour rum is served is designed to occupy the mind before the body can think of mischief. Rum, though, is its own kind of temptation. Officially, it's a ration meant to boost morale. Unofficially, it's a pressure valve. By the 18th century, every British sailor over 20 got half a pint of rum daily, cut with water into grog. It burned the throat and blurred the edges of loneliness. And for a few hours, you could almost forget the ache in your chest or anywhere else. But rum had a darker use, too. It made sailors easier to manage. You can't rebel if you're half drunk, and you can't fall in love if you're too numb to feel. Clever, isn't it? There were other distractions. Religion was one. Every Sunday, the crew gathered for prayers, the chaplain reminding them that sin lurks in idleness. Sailors bowed their heads while secretly praying for shore leave. Faith on board wasn't just about God. It was social control. A reminder that heaven watched every move. The irony was, the temptation seemed to grow stronger right after sermons, like the body rebelling against its own guilt. Rules about behavior filled entire naval codes. The Articles of War, read aloud every week, warned sailors against unclean acts and beastly sins. The punishment was death on paper, at least. In practice, most captains preferred flogging or imprisonment. The idea was to terrify everyone enough that desire never dared surface. Yet the harder you try to ban something, the more it hides, the more it festers. To kill time, men threw themselves into ritualized chores. Decks scrubbed until they gleamed brass, polished to the point of absurdity. The rhythm of brushes, ropes, and shouted orders became a sort of mechanical heartbeat. If you've ever tried to keep busy, just to stop thinking, you already understand this kind of repression. Out here, the Navy turned monotony into therapy, hoping that exhaustion could bleach the mind clean. And then there was language, the Navy's own dialect of half-jokes and euphemisms. You'd hear a sailor shout, "Mind your rope," and everyone would smirk, knowing the double meaning. Humor was a safety valve, too, a way to talk about the forbidden without saying it out loud. The bawdier the song, the safer the crew felt. because laughter, unlike lust, didn't get you hanged. Still, it's hard to laugh when you're 3 months out to sea and your only company is the same 40 faces under the same gray sky. Some sailors tried to suppress everything through prayer, others through work, others through sheer will. But human need always finds cracks to seep through. The more the Navy tightened its grip, the more inventive its men became in finding release, emotional or otherwise. You might think officers were immune to all this, sitting in their private cabins with mahogany tables and brass instruments. But isolation hit them hardest. Commanders couldn't even talk freely with subordinates without breaking hierarchy. They had no equals to confide in. Some turned to writing long philosophical letters to wives or mothers, desperate to remind themselves they were still human beneath the rank. Others grew cold and mechanical, speaking in clipped orders and hiding every trace of softness. There's an old naval saying, "A ship is a world in miniature." If that's true, then it's a world built on repression. The Navy believed that controlling the body kept the mind loyal. And maybe for a time it worked. Empires were built that way, on men who were told to obey before they could feel. But rum could only drown so much. Rules could only bind so tight. Every voyage became a test of endurance, not just against storms, but against the human condition itself. Imagine the creak of the hull as you lie awake, the hammock swinging inches from another's face. The rhythm of breath syncing with yours in the dark. You don't dare move closer, but you also can't move away. That's not just proximity, it's tension distilled to its purest form. And so you learn the unspoken art of the sailor's survival: repress, distract, repeat. One day at a time until land reappears, or until desire finds another quieter way to surface. Some nights, when the sea lies flat as oil and the lanterns flicker low, you start to sense us another economy running beneath the official one. No coins, no contracts, just quiet exchanges of favors, warmth, and silence. The officers call it discipline, but the crew knows better. There's always a kind of trade when loneliness lasts this long. You might have seen it already, the way two sailors linger after their shift, sharing a bit of biscuit or a puff of pipe smoke. Or how one mysteriously gets extra time on deck duty while another covers for him below. It's subtle, never spoken aloud, and yet everyone recognizes it. The ship may sail on rules, but what really keeps it moving are these whispered arrangements. They call it the silent economy of touch. Not all of it is romantic, and not all of it is innocent. Some of it's born from kindness, helping a young sailor through his first terrifying storm, giving him comfort when homesickness hits so hard it makes him sick. Other times, it's darker power, traded for favor, protection, bought with intimacy. The Navy didn't write about it, but diaries and court-martial records hint at a world of glances and gestures that kept the crew's emotional temperature just below boiling. A midshipman named William Bligh, before his infamous mutiny on the Bounty, once described the lower decks as a world of its own passions. He wasn't wrong. Sailors spent so long together, they learned to read each other's moods like weather signs. A cough, a silence, a twitch of a jaw could mean exhaustion or affection or both. And in a world where privacy didn't exist, you learned to love in plain sight, pretending it was friendship. Even punishment couldn't erase it. After a flogging, it was often a fellow sailor who helped clean the wounds, who sat with the punished man afterward, whispering to keep him conscious. That kind of care, physical, immediate, blurred the lines between duty and tenderness. You didn't talk about it, but you didn't forget it either. Of course, not every connection was equal. The Navy was a pyramid of power, and some used that power for quiet coercion. Senior sailors sometimes adopted younger ones as cabin boys or servants. though everyone knew those titles covered a multitude of arrangements. Some were protective, others exploitative. A boy might trade his silence for food or a bit of safety from the rougher hands of the crew. The line between affection and advantage vanished like foam under the keel. Still, there was genuine affection, two strange, complicated bonds that defied definition. A few captains looked the other way, knowing that without such ties, morale might collapse. One ship's surgeon in 1797 wrote in his log, "They are lonely beasts, these men, and sometimes only each other will do." You can feel the weary sympathy behind that line, the recognition that the human heart doesn't obey orders. Have you ever wondered how far people will go to feel seen? That's what this economy traded in recognition. The touch on the shoulder that said, "I know you exist." The shared blanket that said, "You're not invisible." On land, such gestures might mean little. At sea, they meant everything. Sometimes it even showed up in language. A sailor would call another mate or brother, words that carried more weight than marriage vows. The ship's logs are full of such phrases, men referring to each other as beloved friend, constant companion, fellow sufferer. The tone is careful, but the emotion isn't. It slips through the cracks of official grammar. The officers didn't like to talk about it, but they relied on it. A crew bound by emotion fought harder, endured longer. Even when relationships crossed forbidden lines, captains often preferred not to know. The ship needed harmony more than purity. So the unspoken rule emerged, do what you must, but keep it quiet. And that's how this floating world survived, by pretending that affection didn't exist while depending on it for survival. You could call it hypocrisy, or you could call it humanity, adapting to confinement. Either way, it kept the sails full and the hearts just steady enough not to break. You start to realize the sea didn't erase desire, it redefined it. And soon you'll see what happened when that fragile balance shattered under the glare of moral judgment. Every empire likes to pretend its sins sink faster than its ships. But out here, even the water couldn't wash away hypocrisy. The Navy preached honor discipline and God-fearing obedience, while punishing with one hand what it quietly tolerated with the other. The result was a system that talked about virtue while living knee-deep in contradiction. You've probably heard of sodomy trials at sea, the scandal that could destroy a man faster than a cannonball. The punishment was death, though the sentence was rarely carried out. Most cases ended in flogging imprisonment or public humiliation. But the trials weren't really about morality. They were about control. Desire wasn't the true crime, getting caught was. A case from 1756 aboard HMS Princess Mary tells you everything you need to know. A sailor was accused of indecent familiarity with another man after being seen whispering in the dark. There was no proof of anything more, yet he was flogged before the crew to make an example. The real message wasn't, "Don't do it." It was, "Don't let us see it." Officers were no saints either. In the logbooks, phrases like "behavior unbecoming" or "private indulgences" often masked the same offenses they condemned. One admiral in the early 1800s, known for his fiery sermons on purity, kept a personal valet who never left his cabin door unlatched. No one dared mention it, not because they didn't know, but because hypocrisy was safer than truth. It's strange, isn't it? How institutions that demand the most purity often breed the most secrecy. The tighter the rules, the more elaborate the lies. The Navy was a mirror of its age, a world terrified of its own humanity. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Western Europe treated any same-sex act as a sign of corruption, sin, or madness. Yet the very armies and navies that enforced those morals depended on all-male intimacy to survive. Think of it like this. You can't tell men to die for each other and then act surprised when they start caring too deeply. Every bond forged in danger blurred the lines between brotherhood and something softer, something unspoken. Officers called it unnatural, but there was nothing more natural than reaching for warmth in a world of cold iron and colder hierarchy. Still, punishment was a performance. Trials were staged, like theater designed to scare the audience more than to deliver justice. Witnesses gave rehearsed testimonies. Captains quoted scripture between lashes. Sailors whispered about the condemned for weeks, some horrified, some quietly envious of the courage it took to be found out. It was cruelty disguised as morality, ritualized shame, serving as entertainment for the righteous. Yet for all their piety, the officers couldn't escape the same trap. Captain Edward Riou, known as the gallant good man of Nelson's fleet, wrote in one of his rare surviving letters, "The sea is a prison of men's bodies and their affections alike." He understood that repression didn't erase emotion, it just twisted it into new forms. Obsession, resentment, violence. You start to wonder how many tempests came not from weather, but from the storms bottled up inside these men. Even the Church of England struggled to define what exactly sodomy meant. Was it an act, an intention, a temptation? The definitions shifted with each trial, proving that moral certainty was as unstable as the sea itself. The Navy adopted that same vagueness because it allowed selective enforcement. A captain could overlook what he wished or ruin a man when convenient. There's something chilling about how ordinary it became. Flogging posts stained with salt and blood, witnesses forced to watch the condemned praying not for forgiveness, but for a quick end. And afterward the deck was washed clean, the same spot used for drills, as if nothing had happened. The sea swallowed the evidence and the ship sailed on. They called it justice, but it looked a lot like theater. And on this stage, everyone knew their lines: pretend to be pure, pretend to be blind, and above all, pretend not to feel. The cost of that pretending was enormous. Men learned to split themselves in two, the loyal sailor the Navy demanded and the secret human being he couldn't let exist. That split became part of naval culture, passed down like an heirloom no one wanted to claim. And while officers ruled with scripture and lash, the next part of the story shows what happened when women, rare, disruptive, and utterly human, stepped aboard that floating brotherhood. When a woman appeared on a Navy ship, it was like dropping a candle into a powder magazine. The atmosphere changed instantly, tense, curious, electric. Most ships were all male by regulation, but rules like rigging were made to bend under pressure. Women came aboard as laundresses, nurses, wives, or stowaways, and each one turned the ship's balance upside down. You notice it the moment she arrives: boots pause mid-step, jokes cut off mid-laugh, 100 pairs of eyes pretending not to stare. Sailors who could sleep through cannon fire suddenly forget how to breathe. In a world of endless sameness, her presence feels almost supernatural. The men don't see her so much as everything she represents: home, softness, the forbidden. The Navy officially discouraged women, fearing moral disorder and distraction. But war doesn't always wait for morals. On long voyages, officers' wives sometimes accompanied their husbands, especially in the 18th century. They nursed the sick, mended uniforms, even gave birth at sea. One log from HMS Resolution mentions a baby born and baptized before noon, the mother cheerful and knitting by dusk. Imagine that life beginning amid cannon smoke and tar. For common sailors, the rules were stricter, yet where there's a will, there's a petticoat. Some women disguised themselves as men to join the crew. The most famous was Hannah Snell, who served in the Marines in the 1740s under the name James Gray. She fought in India, was wounded multiple times, and kept her secret for years. When she finally revealed her identity, she became a celebrity in London. You can almost hear the Navy squirming, too embarrassed to punish her, too proud to admit she'd done her job better than most men. Others weren't so lucky. Cross-dressing sailors discovered mid-voyage faced trial humiliation, or worse. Yet the records hint at something quietly fascinating. Many crewmates protected them, pretending not to notice. Perhaps affection outweighed doctrine. Perhaps everyone understood that gender mattered less than loyalty when your life depended on the person beside you. Still, the arrival of women, real or disguised, changed the chemistry of the ship. Fights broke out. Men competed for attention or imagined slights. One diary from 1798 describes a brawl over a smile given at the wrong time. Another tells of a sailor who traded his entire rum ration for a lock of hair. It's absurd and yet heartbreakingly human. Months of repression make the smallest gestures feel seismic. And then there were the wives of the lower deck, the unofficial companions of sailors. Some followed entire fleets, living in cramped cabins or makeshift hammocks between the guns. They cooked, washed, stitched, and comforted. When battles came, they carried powder kegs to the cannons, bravery unpaid and unrecorded. Afterward, they bandaged the wounded or buried them. These women weren't distractions, they were survival. Have you ever noticed how the forbidden often becomes the glue that holds things together? That's what happened here. The presence of a few women reminded sailors of their humanity, grounding them in a life that wasn't just war and obedience. It softened tempers, even when it complicated loyalties. Some captains quietly tolerated them, knowing morale improved when men had anyone to confide in, who wasn't another uniform. But for every tolerated woman, there were hundreds more who existed only in stories. Sailors sang about Nancy Molly and Sally Brown, phantoms of longing who danced through shanties but never set foot on deck. These women were myth-made melody, keeping hope alive across oceans. The songs weren't really about them. They were about survival through imagination. Of course, the Navy's moral machinery couldn't stand even a hint of softness for long. By the mid-19th century, regulations tightened. Women were banned from living aboard ships altogether. The age of wooden decks and whispered exceptions gave way to iron discipline and cleaner reputations. The Navy became more professional, which really meant less human. And so the ocean grew lonelier again. The laughter faded, the songs grew sadder, and the few women who'd slipped through the cracks were gone, replaced by portraits, by memory, by a ghost of perfume clinging to the gun deck. The men still needed something to fill that absence, though. And when the next port appeared on the horizon, the entire ship seemed to breathe differently, as if salvation waited behind a tavern door. When the lookout finally shouted, "Land ho!" it wasn't just geography he was spotting, it was deliverance. After months of salt sweat and sameness, the faint silhouette of a port on the horizon promised everything the ship could not: freedom noise and the dangerous luxury of choice. You could almost taste the air changing, heavy with land smells, spice smoke and rumor. Every sailor aboard felt it, a pulse quickening under the skin. The moment the anchor hit bottom, discipline softened. The captain knew he'd lose the men to the shore before sunset. The only question was how much chaos he could tolerate. Sailors lined up for pay, clutching wages already promised to taverns they hadn't seen yet. Shore leave wasn't rest, it was release. Cities from Portsmouth to Kingston, Calcutta to Canton learned to read the rhythm of arrival when fleets came in. Brothels bloomed overnight like tropical flowers. Officially, it was called recreation. Unofficially, it was a storm. Every port had its red-lit quarter, though the lamps were often whale oil, not electric. Prices spiked, diseases spread, tempers flared. And yet no empire could stop it. Even admirals who preached morality knew that denial bred mutiny faster than indulgence did. Some ships even built quarantine days into their schedules, time for the crew to cool down before sailing again, both literally and medically. Venereal disease was the Navy's quiet epidemic. Records from the 18th and 19th centuries show entire crews listed as indisposed. Surgeons called it the pox, the French disease, or the itch, using polite names for infections no one dared describe. Treatments were brutal mercury rubs, lead ointments, or injections with silver nitrate. The cure often crippled men faster than the illness. Yet the same ports that poisoned them also kept them coming back. Imagine stepping off a ship after 300 days at sea, your feet wobbling on stone streets, the noise of laughter and music crashing like surf around you. A woman or man smiles in your direction, and suddenly every rule of the Navy, the Bible, and the Empire dissolves. That's the paradox of shore-leave sailors lived by discipline only to spend their freedom, testing how much humanity they still had left. The locals understood. In many port cities, sailor nights became an economy of their own. In Manila, entire neighborhoods catered to foreign crews. In Port Royal, tavern owners hired interpreters just to negotiate with drunken British sailors. The Spanish called them marineros del infierno, sailors from hell. But they were also customers who kept economies afloat. Even the Navy played along in secret. Commanders distributed protective sheaths of linen or lambskin early condoms to officers not out of compassion, but pragmatism. A diseased officer was a liability. Lower ranks weren't so lucky. Their only protection was prayer and rum. You start to realize how flexible morality becomes when efficiency is on the line. Still, not every encounter was transactional. Some sailors formed short-lived relationships that felt almost like love. Letters survive clumsy, salt-stained confessions to women named Maria Chio or Fatima, filled with promises of return. Most never came back, but the illusion of connection mattered more than the fact. For a man who slept between cannons, a few hours of warmth could feel like redemption. Have you ever noticed how quickly guilt follows pleasure? The next morning, the same sailors knelt in chapel or stumbled back aboard, pretending nothing had happened. The chaplain would preach about sin, and the crew would nod solemnly, as if holiness could erase the memory of perfume and laughter. But the sea never forgets. It has a way of holding on to stories the shore prefers to ignore. Some ports tried to regulate everything. The British, ever methodical, introduced medical inspections for prostitutes in the 1860s under the Contagious Diseases Acts. The idea was to protect sailors by controlling women's bodies, a familiar theme in history. It didn't work. It only pushed the trade deeper into secrecy, while the diseases kept spreading across ships and oceans alike. So the Navy learned its compromise repression at sea, indulgence ashore. It was a rhythm as steady as the tide, self-denial, followed by self-destruction, repentance, followed by repetition. The ocean was the abstinence. The ports were the confession booths. And when the anchor rose again, the crew returned to their floating prison, lighter in coin and heavier in silence. The laughter from the taverns faded with the wind, replaced by the same creak of ropes and slap of waves. You could almost hear the ship sigh, as if it knew it would have to absorb the rest of what men couldn't say aloud. But the ocean is patient. It knows that absence breeds invention, and in the long stretches between ports, sailors found new ways to feed the hunger without touching it. Loneliness at sea doesn't scream, it hums. It's the low, constant vibration under every creak of timber and every wave against the hull, a reminder that the ocean takes not only land, but touch. After a few weeks back at sea, the laughter of the port fades into myth. The ship reverts to its usual rhythm orders, barked ropes, hauled hammocks, swaying in silent synchrony. And somewhere between the endless chores and the silence of the stars, something inside every sailor begins to ache again. The absence becomes a presence so heavy, it feels alive. That's when the substitutions start. You see it everywhere once you know what to look for. A sailor carving initials into the wood of his bunk as if writing to someone who isn't there. Another whispering to a locket that holds only a scrap of ribbon. Men treat their keepsakes like living companions, feeding emotion into them until they seem to breathe. Letters become lifelines. A single page from home is passed from hand to hand until the paper softens the ink almost rubbed away. Some sailors read their letters aloud at night, then tucked them under their shirts like charms. One diary from 1803 records a man who spoke nightly to his mother's letter until it fell apart. You can hear the quiet desperation in that line, can't you? Animals filled the void too. Ships kept cats to hunt rats, but they became mascots, tiny purring fragments of affection that the Navy couldn't regulate. Dogs sometimes sailed as companions, monkeys on tropical routes, even parrots that mimicked orders in drunken voices. The affection poured into them was enormous, almost absurd. When one parrot on HMS Victory died, the crew gave it a burial, with full honors proof that love once starved will attach itself to anything that offers warmth. And then there was the ship itself. Sailors spoke of her like a living woman. She creaks when angry, she groans when tired. They caressed her rails, cursed her moods, and swore loyalty to her hull. Superstition turned steel and wood into surrogate flesh. You begin to realize that loneliness doesn't always end in scandal. Sometimes it simply reshapes the world, so the heart has something, anything to cling to. But substitution could twist too. Some men became possessive, jealous of a crewmate's friendship or a shared duty. In the claustrophobia of a ship, emotions magnified until a joke turned into an argument, and an argument into a knife fight. Naval records are full of phrases like altercation of a personal nature, bureaucratic code for heartbreak turned violent. Others escaped into storytelling. The long watches were filled with tales of mythical women waiting in distant ports or sea maidens who lured lonely men to their deaths. It's hard to tell whether sailors feared or envied those myths, maybe both. Desire was dangerous, but so was emptiness. A myth at least gave the ache a shape. Have you ever noticed how the mind tries to build company out of memory? That's what these men did night after night under constellations that never changed. They created ghosts, lovers, friends, imagined futures, and spoke to them softly, as if afraid to wake the rest of the crew. Psychologists today might call it displacement, but the sailors just called it survival. They were men who'd faced tempests and cannon fire without flinching, yet undone by silence. When you have no one to hold even your own thoughts, start to whisper back. One anonymous letter from the 1820s describes a sailor carving a small wooden doll from leftover planking, dressing it in scraps of sailcloth. He set it on his shelf, the note says, and looked at it as though it breathed. You can almost see it, a man comforting himself with the illusion of presence, because illusion was safer than despair. And maybe that's what loneliness really is at sea. Not emptiness, but imagination, stretched thin enough to take any form. Every knot tied, every melody hummed in the dark was a quiet rebellion against the void. But where there's imagination, there's connection. And soon those quiet rebellions began to knit men together in ways the Navy could neither predict nor fully control. What began as substitution started turning into something else entirely. companionship so deep it blurred into love and loyalty that ran deeper than blood. The longer you sail, the more you realize that the Navy's greatest secret isn't buried treasure, it's affection. Not the polished, sentimental kind found in poetry, but something raw and wordless built in silence and danger. When you share storms, hunger, and fear with the same faces day after day, emotion becomes a kind of glue. And sometimes that glue holds a little too tightly. These relationships rarely had names. Friend-mate, brother words stretched thin to hide what everyone already understood. You'd see it in gestures, a hand that lingers too long on a shoulder, a hammock strung just a little closer, a smile that flickers when orders aren't watching. The officers might look away, but the ship always notices. The term shipmate gained a depth no dictionary can capture. It meant more than co-worker or companion. It meant the one who watches you breathe in your sleep and knows your heartbeat by habit. On land, that kind of intimacy might raise eyebrows. At sea, it kept you alive. Because when cannon fire erupts, trust is everything. And what is trust if not a kind of love, unspoken but absolute? You start hearing about special friendships in letters and diaries. Sailors describe each other in ways that almost sound religious. He was the light of my watch, or I would have died for him without thought. Sometimes they did. During the Napoleonic Wars, when ships exploded under enemy fire, witnesses often recalled pairs of men clinging to each other until the end. The ocean may have erased their names, but the emotion is unmistakable. It wasn't always tender, though. Affection could turn possessive or even strategic. Senior sailors sometimes formed alliances with younger ones, giving protection, extra rations, or lessons in navigation. The line between mentorship and something deeper blurred until no one could tell where duty ended and devotion began. The Navy called it favoritism. The men called it friendship. History calls it complicated. Rumors spread faster than wind. The crew always knew who was too close, who spent too long below deck after lights out. Sometimes it was teasing, sometimes cruel. But mockery was safer than honesty. It let men talk about what they saw without ever admitting they saw it. And yet beneath all the whispers, there was a strange tolerance. You could joke about it, even half approve of it, as long as it never became official. One sailor aboard HMS Indefatigable wrote in 1801, "They share a hammock, and the crew laughs, yet none wish to sleep apart." That sentence sums up the paradox, perfectly discomfort and acceptance tangled together, like ropes in a storm. Have you ever noticed how people who live under constant danger become freer in private? The same logic applied here. When your life could end with one stray cannonball, the petty rules of society start to feel less urgent. Out at sea, the moral horizon widened. What was scandal on land became necessity in the middle of the ocean. Still, every connection carried risk. The wrong word, the wrong witness, and a friendship could become a court-martial. Yet despite the danger, bonds formed again and again, like coral growing in the dark. Maybe because the sea teaches you one unshakable truth: no one survives alone. There's a tenderness in the records if you know how to read it. Ship's logs describe men mourning fallen comrades with a grief too deep for mere friendship. "He was my right hand," one wrote. "I cannot sleep without his voice." The Navy called it sentimentality. Modern readers call it what it was: love shaped by survival. It's easy from a distance to romanticize this, but for them it was never romantic. It was practical, emotional, and often painful. A quiet understanding shared in glances, never in words. They lived in a paradox intimacy that could save your life, but ruin your career. And so they learned the art of silence. Hooked laughter, murmured songs, rough jokes all became camouflage for feelings too dangerous to show. And beneath the surface, a kind of brotherhood evolved. Not the sanitized version carved on monuments, but something human, messy, and real. Eventually, the world on land began to shift. Medicine, morality, even the idea of what desire meant started to change. But the Navy, always proud of being centuries behind the times, wasn't ready for that conversation. It preferred to diagnose feelings rather than understand them. By the time the 19th century rolled toward its Iron Age, the sea wasn't the only thing tightening its grip. The mind of society was, too. The Victorians had a word for everything, even the things they didn't understand. Desire, once punished by religion, was now examined by science, which could be far crueler. What had once been a sin became a symptom. The Navy, ever loyal to the mood of the empire, took that shift and turned it into policy. The ship's surgeon became both doctor and confessor. He kept his instruments in neat velvet cases, lancets, saws, syringes, mercury, and now notebooks of diagnosis. Men who grew withdrawn, anxious, or overly attached to a comrade might be labeled melancholic, hysterical, or suffering from moral weakness. The term sexual inversion hadn't yet entered the textbooks, but the suspicion had. Medicine replaced theology as the new judge, and its sentences were just as harsh. One naval doctor, Thomas Trotter, wrote in 1799 that idleness and excessive familiarity among seamen breed dangerous passions. His prescription, harder labor, less rum, and more sermons. It's almost funny he tried to cure loneliness with exhaustion. The result was a fleet of men who worked until they broke, slept without dreaming, and woke up more haunted than before. The Victorian Navy became obsessed with purity, not just moral, but physical. Inspections grew stricter. Hygiene manuals appeared warning against private corruption. The same empire that painted its maps red now wanted to scrub its sailors white, inside and out. Even masturbation was treated as a medical crisis. Surgeons recorded cases of naval neurasthenia, supposedly caused by depletion of vital energy. The remedies: cold baths, bland food, and restraint belts designed to stop nocturnal temptations. You can almost hear the collective sigh of despair echoing across the decks. And yet, repression only fed curiosity. The more the Navy tried to categorize and contain desire, the more it learned about it quietly, inadvertently. Medical reports began describing the very behavior they condemned, turning shame into data. Sailors became unwitting subjects in the birth of modern sexuality. Every court-martial, every confession, every medical note built the foundation for what later psychologists would call the homosexual identity. The Navy, in trying to erase it, accidentally helped define it. Have you ever noticed how institutions create the very things they fear? The Navy's obsession with discipline made it a perfect laboratory for the study of human longing. You can see it in the contradictions, a surgeon punishing one sailor for indecency, while treating another for nervous affection with gentle understanding. Compassion and cruelty lived side by side, like twins in uniform. By mid-century, the culture of secrecy had calcified. Sailors spoke in code-writing letters filled with nautical metaphors that hid their feelings beneath layers of storm and tide. Phrases like "my truest compass" or "my safe harbor" began to appear. Even illness carried metaphor. Venereal disease was called the mark, loneliness became the fog. You start to wonder if language itself was the last refuge they had. The officers, meanwhile, lived in quiet panic. Scandals threatened careers more than battles did. When rumors surfaced about Admiral Sir John Fisher's intimate correspondence with younger officers, the Navy buried them under medals and denial. Reputation was worth more than honesty. Every institution needs its myths, and this one preferred its men, noble, not human. But beneath all the Victorian starch and ceremony, cracks widened. Psychiatrists ashore began writing about deviation and inversion, inventing categories to box human emotion into neat labels. What had once been a private struggle of sailors now became a public taxonomy. The Navy mirrored that shift, no longer seeing forbidden desire as an act, but as an identity to be purged. It was a quiet tragedy, really. The same hearts that had survived cannon fire were now condemned for feeling. By the late 1800s, the fleet had changed iron hulls, steam engines, telegraphs, but the same loneliness persisted, just wrapped in new machinery. The hammocks became bunks, the rum rations shranken, the sermons grew louder. Discipline still ruled, only now it was measured in paperwork instead of lashes. The sea had become modern, but the heart hadn't evolved at all. They called it progress medicine, morality, modernization. But for the men trapped in the belly of those ships, it just meant the chains got cleaner. The irony of it all is that repression never lasts forever. Beneath the iron deck's change was brewing the slow realization that the ocean, for all its cruelty, had always been a place of strange freedom. And when the modern Navy finally emerged from its age of denial, it carried those ghosts with it, unseen, unspoken, but impossible to drown. You stand on the deck of a modern Navy ship, now steel instead of oak engines, instead of sails. But the ghosts are still here. The uniforms are neater, the code of conduct more polished. Yet the same old silences hum beneath the machinery. Every generation swears it's different, that progress has washed the old hypocrisies away. But the sea, with its endless memory, knows better. Today's sailors have Wi-Fi, shore leave, contracts, psychology officers, and wellness programs. But isolation hasn't disappeared, it's just changed shape. Months at sea still stretch long and lonely. The hammocks may be gone, but the longing remains, only now it scrolls through phone screens instead of echoing through decks. There's comfort in connection, yet also frustration, messages, delayed video calls, freezing mid-smile. Technology cures boredom, not absence. Modern navies at least have learned to speak of desire without pretending it doesn't exist. Policies now protect what once got men flogged: sexual orientation, privacy, respect. In 2011, the U.S. Navy formally repealed "Don't Ask, Don't Tell," acknowledging that silence was no longer discipline, it was damage. Across the Atlantic, Britain followed suit even earlier, reinstating sailors once court-martialed for the same crimes. For the first time in centuries, men and women could serve without lying about who they were. The ocean didn't get kinder, but the institution did slightly. Still, acceptance doesn't erase the past. In the archives, there are names, scratched out trial records, sealed letters burned by descendants who feared scandal. Each represents a life edited for history's comfort. You can picture the faces, young sunburnt, smiling in faded daguerreotypes, never knowing that the world they served would one day rewrite its rules too late for them. Every navy has its way of remembering. Some have begun to acknowledge what was hidden: exhibitions about sexuality at sea plaques, honoring those dishonorably discharged for who they loved. Even the Royal Navy Museum in Portsmouth hosts a small, quietly powerful section on the hidden histories of service. It doesn't shout. It whispers like the men it remembers once did. Have you ever thought about what it means to live in a system that teaches loyalty, but punishes love? That's the paradox every sailor carried across centuries. The same hands that tied knots and raised flags also reached for comfort in the dark, knowing the cost. Maybe that's why the sea feels sacred. It holds all that human contradiction without judgment. Modern sailors still talk about the brotherhood, though now the word means something broader, kinder. Women serve beside men, marriages exist across fleets, and official training includes consent workshops instead of sermons about sin. It's progress, even if imperfect. The ocean hasn't changed, but how we tell its stories has, and maybe that's enough. Yet, when you stand alone on the deck at night with nothing but stars and engine hum, you feel the same old ache that every sailor before you felt. The horizon remains endless, the wind just as cold, the heart just as restless. You can't regulate that out of existence. Perhaps that's the real legacy beneath the waves. Not repression or shame, but resilience. The ability of human beings to adapt, to find warmth in each other, even when forbidden. To laugh under threat, to love under command, to keep some fragment of tenderness alive, where no tenderness should survive. You imagine all those who came before the anonymous hands, that hauled ropes beside Bligh and Nelson, the nameless lovers, whose letters never made it home. The cross-dressing women who fought like men, the punished, the pardoned, the forgotten. They're all there, somewhere below the surface part of the ocean's quiet chorus. The Navy has always claimed to master the sea, but in truth, the sea mastered the Navy. It taught every sailor the same lesson: you can chart every current and still never map the human heart. And maybe that's the only real answer to the question, how did the Navy deal with the lack of sex? It didn't. Not really. It endured, improvised, suppressed, laughed, punished, loved, and survived. Because out there, surrounded by nothing but horizon survival, was always half physical, half emotional. The waves could crush your ship, but loneliness could sink you faster. So when the engine's quiet and you hear that low hum again, the same hum that carried through centuries of wooden decks and whispered secrets. Remember this: every story told at sea begins with longing and ends with silence. Everything else is just the sound of water. They say the first voyage either makes you or breaks you. Before a sailor ever touched salt water, the Navy broke him down on land discipline, first mercy, later. Endless drills, shouted orders, sleepless nights on splintered decks. You learned to tie, climb, obey, and endure because out there, one mistake didn't mean punishment. It meant death. You don't join the Navy, you're swallowed by it. The moment your boots hit the depot platform, the air changes. It smells like oil metal and other people's panic. There's no gentle orientation, no welcome speech, no inspirational music. Just a wall of shouting men who seem to know your name only so they can erase it. One of them points at your hair, another at your civilian shoes, and you realize everything you brought with you is about to die. The line moves fast, a herd funneled toward transformation. You shuffle past signs that read, honor, courage, commitment. But right now, the only commitment you feel is to surviving the next 10 minutes. A man with a clipboard barks your name wrong, doesn't care, and hands you a stack of papers heavier than your courage. Then comes the medical inspection, a blur of cold instruments, awkward poses, and a stranger with a stethoscope declaring you fit for service, even though you've been shaking since you got off the train. Someone takes your watch, another takes your belt, then your name tag, your wallet, your phone, every token of the world outside. You might as well hand over your memories, too. They shove a bag into your hands, filled with identical gray things, socks, underwear, towels. You think it's laundry from someone else, until they tell you it's yours. That's when you hear it, the first command you'll never forget. Move, recruit. You stumble into the barracks, a long room that smells like soap and fear. The bunks are lined in perfect rows, the kind of symmetry that would make a mathematician weep. A petty officer prowls between them like a shark in human form. You stand there clutching your bag while he explains that for the next 8 weeks you belong to the Navy. And in case you doubt it, he explains again, but louder. When the clippers come out, it's not a haircut, it's an execution. The barber doesn't talk. The floor is a battlefield of fallen hair. Black, brown, blonde, all equal in defeat. You catch your reflection in a metal cabinet and almost laugh. You look like every movie extra who dies before the credits. But that's the point. The Navy isn't interested in individuality. It's building a single, obedient organism made of hundreds of you. By the time you're issued your first uniform, something shifts. You slide your arms into the stiff fabric and feel the weight of history on your shoulders. Men who fought typhoons, submarines, boredom. The fabric scratches the boots don't fit. The hat sits wrong, but still, it's the first time you look like someone who might survive the sea. Then comes your first formation. You line up outside in the chill dawn breath fogging the air. Someone sneezes, and instantly the entire company drops for push-ups. You don't even know why, but you drop too. That's the lesson. You don't think you react. You follow the movement, not the reason. It's strangely liberating. Civilization runs on questions. Boot camp runs on volume. Night falls without ceremony. The barracks lights click off, and you lie on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling fan, slicing the dark. Around you, dozens of recruits snore, shuffle, whisper prayers. One guy mutters that he already wants to quit. Another promises to make it through just to prove his father wrong. You stay silent. The sound of waves outside reminds you why you're here, to trade comfort for meaning, or maybe just to find out what you're made of. And when the whistle blows at 4:30 a.m., dragging you out of a dream that lasted 3 seconds, you learn the first rule of naval life. The sea doesn't care if you're ready. It will take you as you are trembling or proud and teach you everything the hard way. The next morning you don't wake up, you're launched awake. The lights slam on like a flashbang, and the petty officer's voice ricochets through the barracks before your eyes can even open. You leap from your bunk in a kind of panic choreography, one you'll soon perfect without thinking. Somewhere between pulling on your socks and buttoning your shirt, you realize something profound. The Navy isn't training you to serve. It's training you to surrender to time, to order, to the noise of collective life. The ritual of shaving begins. 100 recruits, shoulder-to-shoulder mirrors, fogged razors, trembling in uncertain hands. You're told to shave, even if you've got the face of a middle schooler. It's not about hair, it's about control. You nick yourself good. Blood means you're learning. You rinse Pat dry, and the mirror stares back with a stranger's face. You've lost your name, your phone, and now your reflection. Then comes inspection. Every wrinkle in your uniform is a potential explosion. The petty officer glides down the line, scanning, sniffing, judging. His gaze lands on a recruit whose collar isn't perfect, 5 push-ups. Another whose bed sheet has a creased 10 push-ups. You try not to breathe. When he reaches you, he stops, says nothing, and moves on. You've never felt such relief from silence in your life. You march to breakfast in perfect lines, boots hitting the floor in sync. The cafeteria is a thunderstorm of trays, commands, and metallic clatter. You've got 8 minutes to eat food that tastes like someone described flavor over the phone. The eggs are rubber, the coffee is punishment, but no one complains aloud. Complaining is a luxury of civilians. You shovel it down and march out. Classes follow Navy history ranks, flags, knots, first aid etiquette. The instructors talk about Admiral Nelson, John Paul Jones, the Battle of Midway. They talk about sacrifice, but they don't use big words like honor too often. Instead, they say things like, "Don't be the reason your ship sinks." Direct, effective, terrifying. By day 3, shouting stops sounding like shouting. It's just ambient weather. You start predicting commands before they're spoken. You start folding your socks into cubes sharp enough to cut glass. You even start craving the order, the rhythm that drowns out thought. And in that quiet submission, something curious happens. You begin to relax. Chaos is gone. The world is simple again. One man yells, you obey, you survive. But don't mistake that for peace. Every hour is a test, and failure means spectacle. Someone messes up marching cadence, and the whole unit pays the price. It's not unfair. It's designed. You learn that humiliation shared becomes humor. The same kid who broke formation yesterday now cracks jokes about it at night, and the barracks laughs quietly because laughter is also regulated. Sometimes between drills, you catch fragments of who you used to be. A smell of detergent reminds you of home. A certain tone of voice reminds you of a friend who wouldn't last a day here. And you wonder if you'll ever be that person again. The answer whispered in your exhaustion is no. You're being shaved of everything that made you soft. Instructors know the line between breaking and shaping, and they walk it with surgical precision. They call it tough love, though it rarely feels like either. You start noticing how they watch for defiance, not in your words, but in your eyes. A twitch of hesitation, a glance too long, and you'll find yourself scrubbing the floor with a toothbrush, while they casually discuss lunch plans above you. It's absurd and yet effective. You stop hesitating. By the end of week 1, the mirror test returns. You look again. The stranger is still there, but now his posture's better, his eyes steadier. You're not sure if you're proud or scared. Maybe both. You fall asleep that night to the sound of someone crying into their pillow. It doesn't surprise you anymore. The Navy's first mission isn't teaching you to sail, it's teaching you to let go. And tomorrow, when the waves of training rise higher, you'll have to decide whether to fight them or float. By the second week, you've stopped thinking of your body as your own. It belongs to the rhythm now, the synchronized thud of boots, the whistle's shriek, the endless loop of commands. Left, right, left. The chant burrows into your skull until even in your dreams, you're marching. You could probably fall asleep standing up still in formation and keep perfect step. It's terrifying and impressive. Marching looks simple from the outside. From the inside, it's a symphony of pain and precision. Every swing of your arm, every heel strike, every breath must align with 40 other people. One person out of sync, and the whole formation ripples like a bad reflection. The instructors can see that ripple from 50 meters away, and they will hunt it down like bloodhounds. You learn to adapt, to anticipate, to blend. Individualism is a liability here. Conformity is survival. The language changes too. You stop saying I and start saying we. It's not an order, it's osmosis. Every command ends with the same note of unity, aye, sir. It doesn't matter if you believe it. Your mouth learns to move before your mind does. And somewhere in that repetition, you begin to understand how an empire runs not on courage or money, but on synchronized obedience. There's an art to being yelled at. The untrained ear hears rage. You hear rhythm. The instructors shout not because they hate you, but because clarity is louder than comfort. You can't misinterpret a scream. They drill you on everything from tying knots to folding flags, from saluting correctly to cursing like a professional. Swearing isn't rebellion here, it's punctuation. Every yes, chief sounds sharper when wrapped in salt. One morning they hand you a rifle, not loaded, of course, but heavy enough to remind you of its purpose. You practice handling it as if it were a sacred object. The instructor walks down the line barking. That's not a stick, it's your responsibility. He's right. You can drop your fork, you can drop your pride. But if you drop that rifle, you'll wish you'd never been born. The rifle drill teaches coordination, but it also teaches guilt, the kind that seeps in before mistakes even happen. You begin to recognize the hierarchy by sound alone. The cadence of approaching boots, the timbre of different officers' voices. The petty officer's bark makes you tense. The chief's tone makes you freeze. Then there's the rare, soft-spoken instructor, the most dangerous of all. When he speaks quietly, everyone listens harder. You'll learn that volume doesn't equal authority, control does. Discipline, you realize, is less about punishment and more about choreography. The Navy is like a massive clock, and every recruit is a gear. The gears that don't fit get shaved down until they do. And when they finally turn together smoothly, without friction, it's almost beautiful. Almost. Now and then humor slips through the cracks. One recruit trips mid-drill, and 30 people collapse into laughter before remembering they're not supposed to. The instructor hides a grin before doubling your push-ups. Even he knows laughter's necessary pressure without release explodes. You learn to joke quietly, to share smuggled smiles over bad coffee, to find small freedoms in a system built on control. At night, your bunk creaks in rhythm with 100 others. You listen to the rain tapping against the barracks roof, thinking how absurd it is that civilization needs so much noise to create order. But that's the secret, isn't it? Chaos has to be trained out of people. And here, chaos has no place to hide. Still, there's a strange comfort in knowing your place in the line. When the whistle blows, you move. When the boots march, you follow. And for the first time since you arrived, you realize you're no longer pretending you actually belong. The sea, when you finally meet it, is not the postcard blue you imagined. It's gray, cold, and vaguely offended by your presence. You step aboard the training vessel with a swagger borrowed from recruitment posters, but the deck tilts, the stomach lurches, and within minutes, you're clinging to the rail like it's a long-lost friend. Here's your first real hook. The ocean doesn't care how tough you think you are. It can humble an admiral and a rookie with the same wave. They call this part of training familiarization. You might call it mass nausea with uniforms. Rows of recruits lean over the rails, faces pale expressions, frozen somewhere between prayer and regret. The petty officers stroll past with the detached pity of people who've seen this movie too many times. Don't fight it, one says cheerfully. The sea always wins. He's right. No amount of land confidence can protect you from that rolling, endless motion. After a few hours, your body starts to negotiate with gravity again. The horizon becomes your anchor, the one line that doesn't move. You breathe with the swells instead of against them, and slowly, miraculously, your insides stop trying to exit through your mouth. Somewhere in that misery lies the first unspoken lesson of seamanship. Survival isn't about strength, it's about rhythm. You learn to move with the sea, not against it, the way a dancer learns to trust the music. Meals on board are another education. The galley smells of diesel metal and something vaguely edible. You balance a tray on the rolling deck, trying to keep soup in the bowl while the ship tilts at alarming angles. It's like dining on a moving roller coaster designed by sadists. Yet there's a strange camaraderie in it. You lock eyes with another green-faced recruit, and both of you laugh through the nausea. Shared suffering tastes better than any seasoning. Then come the drills. The crew turns the ship into a floating classroom of panic. Man overboard, someone yells, and the deck erupts in a blur of motion. Ropes, flying whistles, screaming commands, overlapping. You scramble to your assigned station, heart-pounding, praying the dummy in the water isn't you next time. Even fake emergencies feel real when the sea's roaring in your ears. Next is damage control. They hand you a fire hose that weighs more than a child shouting instructions you barely hear over the engine's growl. The nozzle jerks in your hands, the spray punches back, and within seconds you're drenched, freezing, exhilarated. Then they simulate a flood, doors, sealing compartments filling with water lights dimming. It's theater with consequences. Every muscle in your body learns what panic feels like and how to ignore it. By the second night, you've stopped thinking of the ship as a machine. It's alive, breathing with the tide, groaning like an animal in its sleep. You start feeling protective of it, even when it throws you around like a toy. That's the strange bond sailors form with something that could kill them at any moment. Maybe that's what love at sea really is, respect sharpened by fear. You hear old stories between drills, legends whispered by instructors who claim to have seen the impossible. The recruit who fell overboard and swam 5 hours in pitch dark before rescue. The cook who stayed in the galley during a fire to save the flour. Because you can't run a ship on empty stomachs. You're not sure if they're true, but they sound truer than truth. That night, as the vessel rocks you to sleep, you finally understand what saltwater baptism means. It isn't ceremonial, it's chemical. The ocean gets inside you, in your pores, your lungs, your dreams. You'll never really be clean again, but you don't mind. You've been claimed. If seasickness was the ocean's way of breaking your body, the next phase is how the Navy breaks your nerves. Damage control training, they call it, but it feels more like guided chaos. The first time the alarm wails, you jump so hard, you nearly fall out of your bunk. The lights flicker red. The air fills with shouts, and before you know it, you're stumbling through a smoke-filled corridor, holding a fire hose the size of a python. The instructors love this part. Their job is to make the fake feel real. They set controlled fires in steel chambers just wide enough for one body to pass. Flames lick the walls, heat bites your face, and your heart hammers against your ribs like it's trying to desert. You can't see much through the mask, just orange glow and chaos. You remember every command from class: crouch, low, aim at the base, sweep side to side. It sounds easy when someone says it. It feels impossible when you can't even tell which way is up. Someone panics. Always someone panics. You hear the crack in their voice over the intercom. That trembling, I can't breathe. You want to help. But the drill instructor's voice cuts through the smoke like a knife. You help by finishing your job. It's brutal, but it's also true. The Navy can't afford heroes who freeze. They want reflexes, not emotions. Once the fires are out, they drown you next. Flooding simulation sounds harmless until the water starts rising around your boots. Cold, fast, relentless. They tilt the ship mock-up just enough to make it feel like a sinking nightmare. You fumble with wooden plugs, hammering them into cracks as icy water surges around your knees. It's like trying to stop a hurricane with a wine cork. You work faster. The instructor yells louder. You hit harder. Somewhere between panic and adrenaline, you forget to think, and that's when you finally start to learn. The sound is what stays with you, the hiss of steam, the crash of metal, the relentless clang of alarms. Every sense is under siege, and that's the point. They're rewiring your brain to stay calm in noise that would paralyze most people. It's not about knowing what to do, it's about doing it before fear arrives. Later, you're marched into a pitch-dark room for blackout drills. The doors seal shut with a hiss. You can't see, your hand can't even tell if your eyes are open. Then bang, the siren erupts, and water starts pouring in again. You move by instinct, by memory, by touch. It's like being trapped inside a nightmare designed by engineers. When the lights snap back on 20 minutes later, your uniform's soaked, your knuckles are bleeding, and you've never been prouder. You notice the instructors don't congratulate you. They just nod scribble notes and shout the next order. It's not cruelty, it's calibration. They're testing thresholds, not feelings. The sea won't thank you for saving the ship either. Every now and then, someone cracks a joke mid-drill just to stay human. Hey, at least we'll be clean after this flood, one recruit shouts as freezing water fills his boots. The laughter that follows is short, wild, a spark in the darkness. Humor, you realize, is another kind of flotation device. Without it, you drown long before the ship does. By the end of the week, you can smell fire and not flinch. You can hear an alarm and feel your pulse slow instead of spike. You're not just trained, you're conditioned. And somewhere inside, a voice you barely recognize says quietly, "I could survive this, for real." That night when the lights go out and your body still rocks from phantom waves, you think about how much you've changed. Not long ago, you couldn't even hold a hose steady. Now you could face a wall of flame without blinking. It's not courage exactly, it's adaptation. Maybe those two things aren't so different after all. You think you've been pushed to your limit, then the Navy politely informs you that you haven't even started. The next phase is about endurance, the art of staying sharp when your body's convinced it's dying. Sleep, food, comfort, luxuries you once took for granted become currency, and the instructors are stingy bankers. The day starts before the sun remembers to show up. The whistle screeches, the lights explode on, and within 60 seconds, you're in full uniform. You're not sure whether you're awake or dreaming about being awake. Coffee is both salvation and scam. It smells alive but tastes like hot regret. You gulp it anyway. Drills begin before your muscles remember they exist. Marching, climbing, sprinting, hauling sandbags across the deck like some absurd ritual of endurance. The officers shout, the wind howls, and your legs burn with a heat that feels ancient. It's not just exercise, it's a message. Fatigue is weakness leaving the body, or at least that's what they tell you right before you collapse. Meals shrink too. Rations measured by seconds, not appetite. 8 minutes to eat, sometimes less. You learn to inhale food like it's tactical. You don't taste anymore, you refuel. A recruit once dared to chew thoughtfully, and the instructor reminded him that thinking is not eating. That phrase becomes gospel. The worst, though, isn't hunger or exhaustion, it's the noise. Constant, relentless everywhere. Whistles footsteps, commands the metallic symphony of discipline. Silence becomes the rarest luxury. When you finally get 5 quiet minutes during cleaning duty, you almost tear up. You start sweeping slower just to make it last. And then there's the crucible. Every branch has its version, a marathon of drills designed to break whatever ego still clings to your bones. You march miles with full packs, drag hoses, patch fake leaks, hoist stretchers, all while instructors rain commands like artillery. Time dissolves. Pain becomes background music. Some recruits mutter prayers, others swear oaths, and a few just laugh like lunatics. You keep moving because stopping isn't an option. Somewhere between exhaustion and delirium, you discover a strange clarity. The body is an animal. It does what it's told if you ignore its whining. You stop arguing with your legs, stop negotiating with your lungs. You just move. It's primitive and pure, like switching off thought to let survival take the wheel. One night you finally collapse on your bunk uniform, still on half a boot dangling off your foot. The guy above you whispers, You think they enjoy this? You chuckle softly. They must. Nobody yells that much without passion. The laughter ripples quietly through the room. You realize misery shared isn't just bearable, it's bonding. That's when you start noticing something deeper. The instructors aren't all monsters. Some are sculptors. They watch you fail and rebuild you in silence. One, an old petty officer with storm-colored eyes, tells you after a long run, "You'll thank me when the sea's trying to kill you and you don't panic." You almost believe him. Modern life rarely tests you like this. You think about your friends back home, sitting in traffic, scrolling through phones, losing their minds over Wi-Fi speeds. You envy them, then you don't. There's something oddly honest about this pain. No filters, no pretense, no maybe later. Just sweat commands and the raw arithmetic of endurance. Weeks blur together. Your hands are blistered, your voice is hoarse, and yet you've never felt more alive. You've learned to function on fumes, to trust reflex over reason. When you finally get 4 hours of sleep, it feels like a vacation. You wake up aching, but grateful because you can still move. You catch your reflection in a porthole window one morning, sunlight cutting through the mist. You look older, not by years, but by miles. There's steel behind the eyes now. You're no longer surviving training. Training's surviving you. Here's your next jolt of reality. The Navy doesn't build soldiers, it breeds families made of strangers. You don't realize it at first, not between all the yelling and push-ups. But something's shifting under the surface. The same people you once blamed for your extra punishments, you now can't imagine surviving without. Brotherhood sneaks up on you like a slow tide. It starts as noise and ends as heartbeat. It happens in small moments. A hand steadying you during a drill when your arms give out. A shared grin during inspection after both of you somehow survive the same humiliation. The first time someone covers for you when you forget your gear, and you do the same for them a week later. You stop being recruits and start being crew. Not by choice, but by gravity. Every group has its archetypes. There's the loud joker whose voice can be heard 3 decks away. The silent workhorse who never complains. The one who writes letters home every night. And the philosopher who somehow manages to quote Marcus Aurelius between drills. Together you form a mosaic of fatigue and loyalty. The instructors know this stage well. They've seen it hundreds of times. They exploit it too. When punishment comes, it's no longer individual. If one person messes up, everyone pays. The first time that happens, you hate it. The 10th time, you understand it. Nothing binds men faster than shared suffering. It's biology. Evenings become sacred. After lights out, the barracks hums with whispers, stories from home, absurd rumors about what comes next, quiet laughter that no officer can quite stamp out. You learn who snores like an angry bear and who talks in his sleep about burgers. One night, someone produces a harmonica from a hidden pocket. And for 10 blissful minutes, the Navy becomes just a room of tired humans, remembering they're still human. You start calling each other by nicknames. Bones for the skinny guy, Hammer. For the one who never stops fixing things Sunday, for the recruit who somehow manages to look clean even after firefighting drills. Nicknames are dangerous, they imply affection, and yet they're unstoppable. There's a moment during one particularly brutal run when a recruit collapses. The instructor's already shouting for him to get up, but you and 2 others lift him before he even tries. Nobody tells you to, you just do it. Later, when he thanks you, you shrug it off, but something unspoken lingers. You're learning the first law of the sea. No one survives alone. History is full of these quiet bonds. In 1942, during the Battle of the Atlantic, a group of British trainees famously refused to abandon their wounded classmate during an evacuation drill, even though it cost them their own completion time. They were reprimanded, of course, but every one of them later served together on the same destroyer. It's almost poetic discipline creates order, but loyalty creates survival. By now, the shouting doesn't scare you anymore. It's just part of the soundtrack. What you really fear is letting your unit down. It's funny how quickly pride rewires itself. Once you wanted to impress the instructors, now you just don't want to disappoint your friends. And here's your hook. The irony at the heart of naval brotherhood, the Navy breaks you apart to make you whole again, but not as yourself, as something plural. You laugh together, fail together, and when one of you finally nails a drill, the rest couldn't. The applause feels more genuine than anything you've heard in your life. Late one night, you sit on the barracks steps watching the fog roll in from the bay. Someone passes you a canteen of water, warm, stale, perfect. You don't say much. You don't need to. The silence feels earned. You realize that somewhere along the way, the Navy stopped being them and became us. Power arrives quietly in the Navy, like rust or reputation. One morning, your name is called during roll, and the petty officer announces you've been made section leader. You don't even have time to process it before everyone starts looking at you differently. Yesterday, you were one of the gang. Today, you're the one who gets blamed when they mess up. Congratulations, you've entered the strange ecosystem of authority. The new role comes with perks, but also paranoia. You get to carry a clipboard which feels impressive until you realize it's basically a lightning rod for complaints. You're the messenger between recruits and instructors. A job that guarantees you'll be hated by both sides at least once a day. Still, it's intoxicating. You get a taste of command, a flicker of what it feels like to be the one giving orders instead of taking them. Leadership training begins not in classrooms, but in moments of chaos. A recruit forgets his gear, and the officer demands, "Who's responsible?" Your instinct says, "Not me," but the title says otherwise. You step forward. The punishment is group push-ups, and you're leading the count. That's when you realize power in the Navy isn't about privilege. It's about accountability. Authority is just the art of being blamed gracefully. The instructors watch carefully. They know rank reveals character faster than hardship ever could. Some recruits let the power inflate them. They start shouting louder, marching harder, trying to mimic the officers. Others grow quiet, almost sheepish, unsure how to balance friendship with command. You try to walk the middle line, to be firm without losing humanity. It's a balancing act performed on a deck that never stops moving. But let's not romanticize it. There's politics too. Even in uniform, favoritism slithers through the ranks. Some recruits have natural charisma, others just know when to nod. The Navy teaches equality through hierarchy. Everyone's equal, just at different levels of importance. It sounds like a paradox until you've lived it. Then it makes perfect sense. Occasionally you catch glimpses of what real command looks like. A lieutenant visits the training ship, calm, confident, not loud. His voice carries without force, his presence fills the room without motion. He listens more than he speaks, and when he finally gives an order, everyone moves as if gravity itself shifted. Later, someone whispers, "That's what leadership sounds like when it stops trying." You file that away. It's easy to forget how young you all are, barely out of school already playing roles that carry weight measured in lives. The Navy doesn't give you time to find yourself. It hands you responsibility and watches who sinks. And yet it's strangely liberating. When decisions matter, you stop second-guessing. Instinct becomes integrity. Of course, with authority comes rebellion. The first time you discipline a fellow recruit, it feels wrong, like turning on your own. You order him to redo his locker inspection, and he glares, muttering under his breath. You ignore it, but later that night, someone moves your boots out of alignment just enough to get you yelled at. A small act of mutiny. You can't even be mad. It's almost poetic justice. Slowly you learn to wield respect the way a sailor handles rope firm steady without showmanship. You praise in private, you correct in public, and you never raise your voice, unless it's absolutely necessary. Leadership, you discover, isn't about commanding attention, it's about earning silence. When you speak and 50 people listen without flinching, you understand what real power feels like. By now you've been here long enough to see replacements arrive, new recruits stepping off the bus with that same lost expression you once wore. Watching them stumble through their first formation feels like staring into a time machine. You want to laugh, maybe help, maybe warn them, but you don't. Everyone needs to be broken in their own way. And as you fall asleep that night, still wearing the weight of rank, you realize something: you're no longer the one being shaped. You're now part of the machine that shapes others. The transformation isn't complete yet, but it's irreversible. Authority has a flavor, and you've tasted it. Dawn is a thin stripe of pewter when the order comes: sea and anchor detail, all hands to stations. Pier lamps still glow like tired stars as you shoulder your gear and step into the choreography you've drilled for weeks. Boots tacky with dew breath, making little ghosts in the cold. The ship hums awake vent fans, generators' radios clicking with clipped replies, and a bosun's pipe threads a quick silver note through the hush. The mock pier from training is gone. This stage has tides. Line handlers stand by with fenders kissing concrete, heaving lines arcing toward the quay to bring aboard the heavier moorings. The harbor pilot climbs the ladder in a brisk, practiced hop proof that even a warship takes advices where shoals write the fine print. On the bridge, orders pass, like relay batons: helm, steady 180. I steady 180. Engine room stand by to answer bells. You repeat what you hear because repetition is proof of listening, and listening is survival. The harbor smells of diesel and wet iron. Gulls orbit the masthead and scold the dawn. Below, the anchor chain murmurs in its housing. Aft, a petty officer checks and rechecks the messenger line like a hymn. Single up, and each mooring becomes a lonely umbilical. Cast off all lines, and your section moves as if a magnet got flipped. Fenders roll the gap, widens 4 feet 10, then open water, and the ship exhales. The pier doesn't move. You do. You learn to love the pilot's dry calm as he talks the captain past tug wakes and crosswinds. The bow noses into the channel, the current presses a cool palm against the hull, and the compass card settles with a small, satisfied twitch. On the chart table, grease pencil fixes tick forward. On radar, merchant blips slide like patient sharks. Rules of the road stop being trivia port-to-port meetings, overtaking restricted visibility, each one a promise you intend to keep. Outside the breakwater, the deck loosens into a rolling language, and your knees translate without asking. The swell is a courteous sea state, for enough to test the breakfast, but not insult it. Salt finds every seam, wind tugs your jacket in needles of spray, sting like soda bubbles gone mean. If you've ever tried to type on a bus over cobblestones that's logging bearings, now only the bus is the size of a neighborhood and the cobbles are alive. Watch rotation begins. Condition 3, 4 on and 8 off if the schedule behaves, which it rarely does. At your console, the headset warms your ear as you sing the geometry of not hitting things. Contact bearing 2, 15, range 8.5, Course 220, speed 15. You don't see ships, you see vectors, CPA and TCPA, tiny futures where you either clear by a mile or exchange paint. The instructor taps the screen and asks recommendation. Your mouth answers before doubt can wake. Drills do not wait for weather. A fire alarm barks and a practiced ballet blooms. Flash hoods up gloves on SCBAs checked with the ritual clack of couplings. You square the nozzle into your shoulder and test the pattern. Then stand the boundary back of your glove to the hatch because palms lie about heat. The space is clean, no smoke, no flame, yet your pulse behaves as if both are here, which is exactly how the Navy prefers it, reflex first, bravery second. Afterward, the captain wanders the mess, no speech, just eyes. He notices the angle of trays as the ship rolls the scuffed non-skid near the scullery, the way people make room without looking. A single nod lands on you, ordinary, untheatrical, and it hits harder than any parade. You expected thunder. You got weather. Between evolutions, the ship settles into the long work of going somewhere. On the fantail, the wake braids a white highway. Over an indifferent gray plain, and you think of other departures, Nelson clearing Spithead with flags bright as stained glass. Chester Nimitz learning caution the hard way and carrying it for a lifetime. Departure is always a test and sometimes a confession. By late afternoon, a squall stacks on the horizon and the barometer loses optimism. First drops hit like tossed pebbles. Then the curtain draws. Visibility shrinks to a smudged cigarette length. The bridge dims to red. Wipers beat a brave, futile rhythm. Sound fog signals, and the forward horn answers with a long, patient bellow you feel in your sternum. Rig for heavy weather. You dog hatches strike down loose gear and add a half hitch to anything that might dream of walking. Nobody says it aloud, but everyone knows this is the exam the classroom couldn't give. The bow buries and rises, flinging sheets of water that explode to glitter. The helm answers with small, serious bites of rudder. Non-skid earns its pay with every step. In a lull, someone mutters, "Still want to travel for a living?" You grin into your collar, cheaper than a cruise, better stories. Night takes the shine off the storm like velvet over steel. Stars return bruised but loyal, and the horizon redraws itself with a ruler steadier than any hand. You stand the mid-watch in a red-lit cocoon, the sea talking in consonants along the hull. The log notes wind course speed and the domestic miracles of a ship remaining a ship, coffee poured without slop. A wrench exactly where it belongs. A door secured by a strip of marline that will not betray you at 3 in the morning. Close to dawn, the squall spends itself, and the water beyond the shelf smells cleaner, colder, more elemental. You mark another fix call, another bearing, and the numbers come out of your mouth without accent. The pier is already a rumor, and the channel buoys feel like yesterday's punctuation. You are not rehearsing. You are underway. You don't cross an ocean, you shed a skin, and tonight you feel it come loose. You reach for a bulkhead in the dark, and your hand finds it without searching the way you once found the light switch at home. And the quiet certainty of that touch tells you more than any speech ever could. Days blur until they turn into systems. You move like part of the ventilation, steady, invisible, necessary. The mess deck no longer feels cramped. It feels scaled to purpose. Your boots choose the footholds they trust. Your ears sort alarms from gossip wind, from wake engine, from rumor. If a valve whispers wrong, you hear it. If a bearing changes a fraction, you taste it in your teeth. You used to think sailors were storytellers. Now, you recognize their translators, converting sea into sense, converting noise into a map your body can read without asking permission. The unit breathes together. People you barely noticed in your first week are now fixed stars in your private chart, the sonar tech who hums old blues at 2 in the morning, the machinist who gives wrenches nicknames and somehow remembers where every one of them slept last, the cook who plates pancakes like medals after a rough watch because morale is logistics. You stop measuring time by clocks and start measuring it by evolutions, replenishment at sea drills, watches weather. Clock time is for sure. Ship time is the choreography of what must happen. You have superstitions now, silly and absolute. The lucky pen on the chart table, the 2-step pause before keying the bridge-to-bridge radio, the exactly 3 taps on a bulkhead before opening a hatch in heavy weather. Nobody taught you these. The ship did the way it teaches you to walk, with knees loose and mind tighter. You used to cling to rails like a tourist on a ferry. Now you slide through passageways, with one hand trailing the paint not to steady yourself, but to say, I'm here to the steel that carries you. History sneaks into the routine without fanfare. A training brief mentions USS San Jacinto riding out hurricane seas in 1863, with sails reefed to handkerchiefs and discipline drawn like a blade. Another day, a petty officer quotes, Grace Hopper ships in harbor are safe. But that's not what ships are for. You don't pin these lines to a motivational board. You pack them like tools. When the frames moan at 0300, you borrow their steadiness, and it fits. There's a moment on the bridge wing when the horizon opens like a zipper and the sky falls in clean. Jupiter burns a white hole in the dark, and the Milky Way looks like someone dragged a thumb through powdered ash. You breathe cold air that tastes of salt and distance and realize you've stopped resenting the watch that stole your sleep. The sea has traded you something: exhaustion for perspective. Would you have chosen that trade back on the station platform? Maybe not. Do you choose it now without blinking? You receive small promotions of trust. A quiet you have the con that doesn't sound like a coronation, but feels like one anyway. Your first recommendation to alter course accepted without edit. The headset grows lighter. Responsibility stops feeling like something loaned and starts feeling like something worn, broken, honest. If someone asked you weeks ago what confidence felt like, you might have said, volume. Today you'd say, silence, the kind that follows a correct decision when no one needs to add anything. On your rack, you notice your kit is arranged with a precision that would have shocked your older self. Socks folded as if geometry were a virtue. Boots aligned like punctuation. Not because an inspection looms, but because order gives back minutes and minutes, repay in clarity. Those toothbrush floors, those maddening checks. The ritual of stowing and securing each was a breadcrumb left by a calmer future. You can locate a flashlight in the dark in the 15 seconds between an alarm and a heartbeat. And no part of that skill is accidental. When weather turns gentle, the ship slows to wait for a tanker to finish her crossing, and you lean on the lifelines, eyes narrowed against glare. Flying fish scissor the surface like bad ideas trying to escape. The wake writes a promise behind you that nobody can keep. And for the first time, you understand why old sailors talk in present tense about voyages taken decades ago. The sea doesn't file memories. It keeps them open on the desktop, ready to be edited by whatever wind shows up next. A practical question for you. When you step ashore after this, what everyday noise will sound wrong? The microwave ding, the elevator chime, the absence of the deck's slow breathing. You may catch yourself bracing for a swell in a perfectly still grocery aisle, or sidestepping a child's toy with the same neat hip turn you use to clear a combing. That won't be embarrassment. That'll be the new operating system refusing to uninstall muscle and memory, agreeing to keep you ready. Landfall arrives the way dawn does, gradual, then sudden. A pale line rises out of haze, becomes buildings, becomes cranes, becomes a smell of soil you didn't know you missed. The pilot climbs aboard with harbor weather on his jacket. Orders compress speed, rudder lines, each one familiar. Now unshowy, hands move before adjectives. On the forecastle, heaving lines curl true, and the heavy eyes of the bollards greet you like old neighbors. Hold to. Take a strain. All stop. The world shrinks to the length of the pier and the width of the ship until everything touches. When the brow goes across and the whistle cuts the air in a clean strip of ceremony, you stand easy and catch your reflection in a port light, the same face rearranged. You can hear a pump lie. You can coil a line that won't betray you at midnight. You can find north when the sky refuses to help. None of this feels cinematic. It feels competent, and that is better because competence repeats. And there's the last quiet change, the one you almost miss. You no longer speak about the Navy as if it were a distant institution. You say we without thinking. You shoulder a bag that feels lighter than when you boarded and step down the brow with a gait that forgives sidewalks for being so still. Nothing concludes. Routines simply pause. The sea keeps its ledger. You carry a copy in your bones, and the next time a whistle slices morning thin, you'll already be moving. Close your eyes now. The ship is quiet, and the sea whispers in long, even breaths. You feel the deck steady under you, as certain as a heartbeat, as patient as moonlight on water. Let the last small worries drift astern. Little buoys fading into the dark. Inhale with the swell, exhale with the fall slow and easy. The watch stands ready. You can rest. Stars keep their silent bearings. The horizon holds its line. Warm bunk, soft blanket. Gentle engines murmuring nothing urgent, nothing sharp. You float untied from clocks carried by calm. Sleep finds you safe, steady homeward bound.